Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us live. My name is Rob Phelan. I'm coming to you from a high school in Frederick County, Maryland. I'm joined by Nicolette DiMaggio, who's here to talk to us about the true cost of weddings. Nicolette is let me see, I gotta get this right, an equity research associate and the author of the children's book, Stock Explorer. You can find Nicolette on social media each day, breaking down what's happening in the stock market for those of us who aren't as in the know as maybe Nicolette is. It's a great summary most mornings where you get to find out what's the big stories going on in the stock market and how it might impact the market in general. So yeah, great resource for young investors to take a look at and just to learn a little bit more about what's going on, and particularly how the news and how people's feelings about a company might impact a stock price or an investment. Nicolette, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you guys so much for having me today. And I'm fresh off planning my own wedding, so I hope I can share some helpful insights and just stuff from my own experience. Now, I guess to kick off my conversation, I feel like the biggest thing for me with wedding planning was seeing the range of options you can go with weddings. Like, you can spend anywhere from hundreds of dollars to millions of dollars. And I did not completely understand the wedding industry until I got engaged. And I started researching, like, okay, professional advice, what the range of costs were for things. And I live in New York, so to get married in New York State is expensive. So then you toy with the idea of a travel wedding versus an in-state wedding. And basically, we came to the conclusion we wanted to get married in New York State. And we had discussed our current state of savings with each other. And now, this is the biggest thing of all, like discussing your financial goals with your partner. And I know this is said all across financial literacy. This is probably one of the most important financial decisions you'll make in your life. And I do not say it lightly, because your partner's financial goals may be different than your financial goals, and you kind of have to get on the same page when it comes to a wedding. And me and my now husband came to that because we sat down and were like, hey, we would like to travel at some point in our lives. We would like to have kids. We would like to buy a house. Oh, yeah. And we want to have this nice wedding with all of our friends. So, how do we do that, right? Without breaking the bank and going into a massive amount of debt. Now, I was proposed to.
So hold on, before you do that, this is like a really great teaser for what's going to come today. There's so many things that we got to go into
Yeah.
here. I want to go back to that first one of just the biggest financial decision that you might make in a lifetime. So a little bit of statistics for you. The average cost of a US wedding in 2021 was $28,000 across the US. Now, if you break it down by state, there are some states that are more expensive than others. I think DC was coming in around 44,000, and then some of the other states like Iowa were coming in around 13. So it definitely varies depending on what state you are in. But 20,000, the average, like that's not nothing. That's not like, oh, that's some celebrity getting married. That's what the average person is paying for a wedding. So this is a huge financial decision. And it's not just about the wedding. Getting married is a big financial moment in your lifetime and your future finances, because we know that on the pro side, being married means that you get to build wealth together. You have two incomes, you have two people working towards the same goal. But on the opposite side of it, the con side, you could have one person working against you, like you kind of said, if you don't have the same financial goals. And then the sad statistic, about 40 to 50% of US marriages are ending in divorce at the moment. The good news is that number is declining. So we actually have seen a recent decline in the number of divorces each year in the past couple of years, but there's also a lower rate of marriage too. So the number of marriages is less, the number of divorcees is going down a little bit as well. Interesting stat as well, about 6% of people over 45 have never been married. So around 90 to 95% of US adults will at some point in their lives go into the marriage process. So this is very applicable to most people out there. All right.
Yeah.
So Nicolette, we got a lot of places to go, especially with what you hinted at, all the things that we need to talk about. First one, selecting the partner. This is not a relationship advice section, but certainly there are some things to consider. What would you consider when it comes to picking a partner from a financial perspective?
From a financial perspective, like I said earlier, you have to be aligned on life goals. And this should be way before the engagement comes. Like, you shouldn't be getting engaged, saying yes, and going, oh, wait, what are your goals? What are my goals? Like, you guys should be talking about this along the way. And if you're not, that's kind of a warning sign, right there. Granted, some people get to the engagement point. It happens to a lot of my friends. They say yes and they sit down to talk about goals and they're like, wait a second, you want to travel the world and never have kids. I want to have kids and buy a house. We're not working in alignment here. So that's number one. And I think you have to just look for a couple of traits. Number one would be honesty. Not everybody is perfect. We're all learning, right? None of us were taught this in school. I professionally work in the financial industry. So does my husband. My husband is a financial advisor. So if I have anybody who's, grilling me and saying, okay, how are you allocating your budget? Like, he is way better at planning for the future than I am. I'm more so like, let me research this stock and talk about it with institutional investors. So that was a big thing because we were both like, okay, we have all these things we want to do together in life as a team. Um, but you have to have somebody who's honest. And I have had friends who have people who say, hey, I want all these things, but they haven't been saving up for it, or they don't sit down to develop a plan, and they're not honest about their current state of financial status. And it's unfortunate because you see people who once loved each other then get into the weeds of, okay, what's your current financial status? Where do you see yourself going in the next couple of years? And they sometimes don't get an honest response, and that happens way too frequently. So I guess the biggest thing would just be honesty. Everybody's in a different boat, and there's nothing wrong with that. You just want your partner to be honest and be open to developing a plan. Like, one of the first things we did when we got engaged was we had separate savings accounts. We had separate everything. We had separate investing accounts, separate IRAs. This happens with most people. And the biggest question is, do you go into joint accounts? Now, I firmly believe in keeping my stuff separate, but we did develop a joint cash management account specifically for our goals. And I would say to develop one of these accounts per goal. I know it sounds kind of silly, but we have a joint account for our house savings. We have a joint account for our wedding savings. And this is where we decided, okay, how much do we each want to allocate to this and save up for? And what is our savings plan? And now, Fidelity doesn't sponsor me. I just happen to use Fidelity. But they do have a really helpful savings app called Fidelity Spire, where you can put in your current financial state and the goals you want to save for and how much you project to spend. And they basically say how much you need to put into your savings every month, and they do the work for you. So I kind of was doing that all by hand in an Excel, and then I found this app and I was like, actually, when it comes to a wedding, this is really helpful and a lot faster, considering 2022 sent me a lot of curveballs. And I thought I was going to pay one price for my wedding, and then I got into quotes with vendors and I was like, I'm not really being realistic about how much certain things that I want cost.
Okay, before you jump into the finance of the wedding, I got to go back to some of those things you said, because the partner side of things, the honesty one, and honesty, like, you can have an honest partner, but you also need to go deep in your conversations. Like, if you have had a shallow surface level relationship at the moment, when it comes to some of these big conversations, before you get engaged or during the engagement process is when you have to go deep, because once you get married, now you are legally tied to that person. Engagement is not a contract yet. You don't have to go through with it, but once you are married, you are legally bound to that person, and then all the things that come afterwards to follow in. But you said, their financial status. That would include what?
That just includes everything. So, okay, how much are they saving for retirement? How much do they have in their personal savings? How much is in their investing account? How much are they making annually? Now, I know this sounds really shallow, but you have to be kind of realistic and say, okay, you could have a job that isn't paying a lot, but if you don't have a savings mindset and you're going off in tons of credit card debt before you even get married, you have to be honest about that. And I've had friends who get engaged, think it's all rosy, and then they find out, oh, wait, my partner, hasn't really been honest with me and they're in a massive amount of debt. Like, how do they get out of this debt? I love this person. Are they willing to do it? Are they willing to be honest? Now, that's the sad reality for most Americans, and I'm not going to lie about that. I have tons of friends that have faced that. I was fortunate to have a partner who was completely honest with me, And like, not only that, I'm somebody who has my own side business with my book, similar to you, Rob, where I'm doing my own thing and I'm marketing that on top of my full-time job. And sometimes I'll get into these bulk book sales, and my partner's in the corner like, you shouldn't be giving that much of a discount, or you shouldn't be doing that. Like, value yourself more. You want a partner that advocates for you and pushes you to be your best self.
I love
And
that. Yeah.
if you don't have that, it's really hard for something like that to stick.
So yeah, watching out for the financial infidelity, which is not, so infidelity, we think about not being honest or not being truthful to your partner. Financial infidelity is hiding things like debt. So you're in a ton of debt and you're not sharing with your partner. So make sure you have a clear idea of what's their credit card debt situation. Do they have car loans? Do they have student loans? Because as soon as you get married, you're basically saying like, this debt becomes my debt, because if you are with this person, you are saying we're going to build a financial life together. So if they're in debt, now you are also in debt. And are you willing to take that on? And then same thing, what are you bringing into the relationship? Are you bringing a lot of debt as well? Income is a great one. Make sure you have a good idea of what everyone's income is and then what are in their accounts. Now, you can do it like Nicolette says, where you keep your own financial identity. And I actually really like that you do that. I feel like my wife and I do something similar. You each have your own personal checking accounts, probably your own personal savings account, but then you have joint accounts for common goals. And you will find other personal finance experts who will say, no, if you are married, everything goes into one pot and you just share everything. And that's just how you do marriage. And if you're not doing that, then you're not really in it. Push back on that idea and don't bow to that kind of pressure. I've had people tell us like, oh, well, you're basically just glorified roommates then. Like, you're not really married. Like, if you're just sharing like joint expenses, and you have to be ready for that. And cultural norms will say, well, traditionally, we always put everything together. You pool everything. What's mine is yours. And you have to be ready to face that. And how are you going to answer that question? And that's something you discuss with your partner. Like, what do we want to do? Do you believe in combining finances 100%? Like, what's yours is mine, all in. Is there a mine? And is there a yours? Is there an ours? And how are you going to do that? What's that going to look like? So I love that you brought that up. All right, let's move into the wedding, because the first step in getting married after you've kind of figured out, is this the right person for you, is usually one person has to propose to the other. And if we're talking about a heterosexual couple, traditionally it has been the male who is proposing to the female, though the stats are telling me now that there's 5% of women each year will propose to their male partner. So that number is going up. So women, you can definitely get out there and propose if you would like to. The engagement ring was the first question I had.
Yeah. So this is the biggest thing. Like, my fiance proposed to me, and I immediately was like, oh my gosh, how much did you spend on this ring? Because I'm a very cost sensitive person by nature. And he's like, you're not allowed to know that. But obviously, you have to I'll show you guys my ring. This is my ring. And the biggest thing you have to think about is, okay, there's a certain number of carats that go into diamonds, there's clarity. But I do have friends that I work with and colleagues that have been in the mining industry, in the diamond industry. And I will tell you, if you go to bring this to a jeweler to exchange it, you're never going to get what you originally paid for. It's not a good investment. However, it's something that there's a lot of myths around, and it's evolved over the years. So you can have a natural diamond or you can have a lab grown diamond. Now, I've learned about this a bit more through relatives, but lab grown diamonds tend to be more affordable. And they're the same, they're still diamonds. And you don't feel as guilty about it because somebody probably didn't die in the process of mining that diamond. It's not a blood diamond. So there's ethical ties to that. Now, it can range. People get extremely crazy when it comes to diamond. My diamond was appraised for $20,000, fully transparent, because although he told me I didn't need to know the price, there was no insurance on it. And that's key. If somebody were to steal this and I didn't have insurance on it, I'd never get anything back for it. So I was like, all right, well, I need to go get insurance on this. And when I went to the jeweler, he's like, your diamond is worth $20,000. And I was like, I can't believe he spent $20,000 on a ring. So that was our first conversation, was like, okay, I love this. It's a beautiful piece of jewelry I'll have for the rest of my life.
So now
But I would have been, yeah.
Let's be fully transparent that most teens watching this are going to be like $20,000. Like, that is a couple of cars right now. Like, no way.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know when I was in the process of getting engaged. So I got engaged about 7 years ago, and it was, how much do I spend on this ring? So the myths or tradition will throw up these dumb numbers. Like if you Google it, like how much should I spend on an engagement ring? Google will probably spit back to you, oh, about 1 month of your salary, not even 1 month of your take home pay, 1 month of your salary. So if you're making $120,000 a year, you're expected to spend $10,000 on your engagement ring, which is insane. Like it's a really dumb number. It's you should never go off a rule of thumb for something like that. What do you think, Nicolette? How would you figure out what's the right amount to spend on an engagement ring?
I think you should not be spending even that much. Like when you think about how much you have to spend in a month, like I was very fortunate that my husband went out and did that, but looking back on it, I'm like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you spent that much money on a ring. You could have got the same ring because this is a natural diamond. You could have got this lab grown for a couple $1,000s. You didn't have to spend, I mean, that's like a down payment on certain big ticket items." So, and I have guy friends who have discussed it with me. They're like, "So what do we do? Do we go to Tiffany's?" And I cannot stress this enough. Do not go to Tiffany's. They upcharge everything. You will be spending 120% of what that ring is actually worth at the end of the day. And it's not worth doing that. Do not do that. Now, full disclosure, I know my husband didn't go to Tiffany's. He went down to the Diamond District in New York City and found somebody who did it. So what this was appraised for could not be what he actually paid, in all honesty. When I went to the appraisal, I was like, I don't know what he paid. I have no idea. He won't tell me. And it's probably because it was an extreme amount. And he even said, as a financial advisor, I have no idea what people pay for these things. Where do I start? I want to get you something nice, but I also don't want to break the bank. So I don't recommend anybody does that, honestly, not even if you're making a ton of money. Now, I'm very lucky. My husband is very successful. I am very successful. We're both in good financial positions. But even for me, like you could remodel a kitchen for $20,000. You can do a bunch of other things besides this. Now, hopefully, knock on wood, I'll never have to exchange this or never want to exchange this. I'll pass it down to future kids. But it's ridiculous. I mean, you can get a lab grown diamond for $1,000 to $2,000 and be fine.
Did he ask you what you wanted at any point? Did you guys have any
So
conversation about this?
this is the other thing. So I was completely surprised. So there are some women who are involved in the process. They pick out what they want. They say, I like this shape. I like this type of diamond. And this is also where it gets really tricky for the guy because some women will go, oh, I want Bieber's ring. And she's got like a 3 carat rock on her finger. She's a celebrity. And they'll have these unrealistic expectations of the ring they should have just because they want something like that. And as a woman, it is nice to have a nice ring, but it's not necessary. And you could get the same thing for less, is what I'm trying to say in the nicest way. Like,
Well,
after I
I think that comes
learned,
down to you personally as well. Like you are
yeah,
someone who is not materialistic in that way. And you need to know your partner. Your partner
yeah,
will have different love languages, different ways that they want love expressed to them. And some may be very much about the size, the value of the ring. And some may be like, I really don't care. Put a ring pop on my finger and we're good. So really make sure that you are thinking about what your partner actually wants versus what culture is dictating to you, or what pressure you feel like you're getting from your friends, your family, your neighbor who just got married next door, and like the size of the ring that's on their finger. None of that should matter. It should really be what's right for the two of you. In my case, my wife, I don't think it was as much of a surprise for her. Like we knew based on our relationship, the way it was going, that we were probably going to get married. So when we would walk through towns or past a jewelry shop, she would like stop, look, and be like, oh, I really like those ones. Those look really great. So just dropping hints everywhere. If you're not fortunate enough to get those kinds of hints, talk to their friends, talk to their sisters, brothers, whoever, their mothers, whoever might have some idea of what they really like, and let them be involved in the process so that you are getting the right rings. The last thing you want to do as well is spend a couple of thousand or a couple of hundred on a ring for something that they don't like. So you want to try and get something that they like and that fits their personality. Some people I know hate the fact that their ring costs so much money because they feel like they can't wear it.
yeah, well,
That
that's the other
I can't
thing.
walk around with a couple of $1,000s on my finger. It's dumb. It doesn't make sense. This costs more than my car does, whatever it is. Like, and if that's your partner, then don't buy a ring that expensive. Either put a cheaper stone in it or find something that's a little bit smaller. Think about what they do. So do they work with their hands? Are they not going to be able to wear this ring most of the time because they do something physical, like maybe a mechanic or something like that, where they just cannot wear jewelry during the day? Like, if so, why do they care what their ring looks like? They're not going to wear it most of the time anyway.
Yeah, I think those are really good points because at the end of the day, like I don't wear this when I go to work out or do anything extensive with my hands. And nowadays there's technology around rings, like there's the Aura ring, which records your heartbeat. And that's only like a couple $100. And if you're somebody who's into fitness and you're like, hey, I really just rather have that, like that's pretty cool too. But yeah, that is a big thing because when you have something super expensive on your hand, like for example, when I went on my honeymoon to Italy, I was like stressed out. 'Cause I was like, we're in a foreign country. This is something really expensive on my hand. You got to be careful when you're traveling and going to certain places, just because it's something that people will see and it's stressful having it. I mean, I had my hands in pockets the entire time I was in Italy, in part because I wanted to wear it, but in another part because I was scared that somebody was going to jack it from my hand, quite personally.
Yeah, and sometimes, like with an engagement ring, it may not fit right the first time because unless you are very somehow tactful about finding out what their ring size is. So for me, like I took one of my wife's other rings that I knew fit her well, and I brought that in, and then the jeweler told me what size her finger was. Because I mean, who knows what size a finger is? Like, why would anyone know that information? Or you like somehow be like, oh, let me tie this piece of string around your finger just because, and then walk away. There's really no other way to know it. So sometimes a ring will not fit right the first time, and then you take it back in to be resized to fit their actual finger. So if you're kind of guessing, that one might be what would happen. The wedding bands. So now this might depend on culture in terms of what you are buying or what is culturally normal for you. So an engagement ring is tradition. And then when you get actually married, there's usually an exchange of rings. So you can go back into the history of that and what that meant. But that was something that came from a tradition of exchanging rings to show that you are married to someone else. The rings themselves, when you're buying an engagement ring, be aware that there are some engagement rings that go with a wedding band. So there's a matching set that they fit with one another, or that they are a style that matches one another. So if you're buying a very expensive engagement ring, you could end up with a very expensive wedding band as well. Particularly if it's a unique shape. Like my wife's one had like a basket on it. So it's a big circular setting, and it needs a curved wedding band to fit in next to it. So you have to watch out for that. Some other tips for saving on rings: go with cheaper metals if you need to, or go with newer metals. So there are lots of new synthetic metals coming out besides gold and silver and those sorts of things. My ring is made from a metal called Vitalium, which still had like patent pending on it when I got it. And my wife's ring is an estate piece. It's an older piece of jewelry that the jewelry store bought and then is reselling. So rather than buying something brand new, we bought something that had some history already. And we don't know what the history was. And I know that there's some taboo around that. Like if you know that a ring comes from a divorced couple, is that like, nope, can't do that, it's bad luck? Or is it like, yeah, whatever, it's just a ring, like it now has a new story? What would you say?
I think that's pretty cool because it could have came from anybody. You don't know who it came from. And then you can just think about that. And I also think that's probably one of the smarter ways to buy a ring that nobody talks about enough is that when somebody comes to the store, like I said earlier, with a piece of jewelry like a ring, they're sellers of diamonds. They're not buyers of diamonds. So they're getting that ring at a much cheaper price than it's actually worth. And then they're reselling it at a cheaper price. So you're probably getting a more valuable ring at the end of the day because it was sent back to the store and then they sold it again. And nobody talks about that enough. Like if you truly understand the diamond industry, that's still the same diamond. The diamond didn't change. The ring didn't change at all. And unfortunately, people don't talk about that enough. And with divorce rates at the rate that they are, I'm sure there's tons of rings like that.
Another one that we talked about was, my wife and I talked about the finances of it. And she's like, when we got to the wedding band stage, like, we're not going to spend a ton of money on this. And same with the engagement ring. Like, she gave me that permission to not spend a ton of money because she knew that we have financial goals. We don't have a super high income at the time. I was a teacher, she's a therapist. And we came with the idea that you can always move up in ring if you want to. So same way you can move up in house, move up in car, you can start with a smaller stone that is cheaper or has a lower clarity level, or the cut isn't as good, whatever it is. And you can always move up in stone as your income increases or your wealth increases if you feel like you need to do that. So that's just another option for you all. If you're like, I want to get married, but I cannot afford right now the true dream Bieber ring that my wife really wants. So have that conversation. Like, would you be cool with this? Like, could we do the beautiful setting with a smaller stone, and we leave space for it to move up into a bigger stone as we get more wealthy? You can look at alternatives to diamonds. Like, does your wife or your future partner truly care about having a diamond? Do they hate diamonds? Would they be cool with a ruby or an emerald or some other type of stone that looks kind of like a diamond, but isn't a diamond? So we have like the fake diamond. It's not glass, but it's something that's pretty close. Yes. What's it called? Cubic zirconium. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you're right there.
So could you trade, could you use that as a placeholder and then trade up once, you've got more money? Okay. Moving into the wedding part. So you're engaged. Congratulations. And now it's time to start thinking about the wedding. What are the steps to going from engaged to finally saying I do?
There's a lot of steps. Okay, so like I said earlier, it's like discussing again, are we okay with paying this much for our wedding? Like point blank, period. Do we want to have a big wedding? Do we want to have a small wedding? Where do we want to get married? And now everybody is different. You could literally, like Audrey Plaza, who's a celebrity, by the way, I learned this the other day. I was just like scrolling through TikTok and she had a video. There's a website called onehourwedding.com, and you could quite literally pay $350 and get married within 1 hour. And that is what she did. And she's a celebrity that probably makes tons of money because that's where they were. They didn't care about having a big party. They just wanted to get married and they were okay with it. So you can literally spend that much. Now, me and my husband were different. We both have big families, and we sat down and we were like, okay, how many family members do you have? Because the amount of people you invite is important. How many family members do I have? Do we want kids there? Do we not want kids there? These are the questions you have to ask. And we started counting, like, oh, it would be great to have kids. Do you know how many kids are in both of our families?
It definitely like exponentially grows the more layers you
Yeah.
add in. So like you go immediate family, it's small. You go extended family, now it gets really big, and you include kids, it gets even bigger again. Depends on whether you are the youngest or the oldest in your family as well. If you're the youngest, I'm sorry, you're going to have a lot of kids in that family potentially. If you're the oldest, you might actually have a smaller wedding. So I was the oldest. There's no kids on my side of the family yet. So it was like, great, no kids to worry about.
Yeah. It was
That's
really crazy. Like, we had 38 kids that we counted.
yikes.
And I just came to the conclusion that, you know what? Sometimes you just have to say no. And it's probably not the nicest thing, but you're going to have to say no a lot during wedding planning. And I set the tone up front and said, although we love your kids, we'd like you to have a night out to yourself, and this will be a kids-free wedding. And I only had kids in my wedding party. So I only had a flower girl.
That was a
And I
very nice way of
only,
saying it.
it's a very nice way to say, hey, I only want kids in my wedding party, which was my flower girl and my niece, because I knew that the best man had a baby last year. So I said, they can come. They're very close family members. But everybody else, it was the nicest way of saying, everybody else, please keep your kids at home. If you can't make it possible, I'm very sorry. And some people didn't come because of it, but I was okay with that decision because when you price out the cost per plate, even for kids, when you're doing an inclusive venue, I mean that comes out to a couple $1,000s. And I was like, you know what? I'm sure people would like the night off. And if they don't, that's just something I have to deal with. And everybody's family is different with that. I mean, I caught a lot of grief from putting that as a no, and I'll say that in the nicest of way. But at the end of the day, I probably saved myself $10,000 when you come to the cost per plate and including kids, and I was okay with saving myself $10,000.
So yeah, stat for all of you, was looking this up on the Knot, so KNOT, which is one of the, I guess, standard go-to sites for wedding planning. So they would be like the biggest, I guess, information, and maybe brides.com as well. Average cost per person for food is around $75 a plate. And it doesn't really vary very much from adult to kids. It's kind of like you can say, well, the kid's going to eat half the amount of food. It doesn't matter. They're just charging per person that comes in. So it's expensive to add people to your wedding. You will get a lot of ideas and input as to what your wedding should look like. And we'll come back to this in a minute because I want to talk about parents in a second. But at the end of the day, this is your party. This is your celebration. And if you can keep that at the core of all the decisions you make and what you want, it makes it a cheaper process. If you start listening to everyone else, it becomes very expensive because no one else is paying the bill. So, all right. Did you guys talk about a destination wedding by chance? Did you like consider that option where you go somewhere else? So you fly to a foreign country, something like that. And really it limits the number of people who can come because now you're making it the barrier to getting there so much higher. So it usually decreases your numbers as well. Did you guys talk about that?
Yeah, so I'm very type A. So I looked at all my options up front and I said, well, what if we went here? What if we went here? And it would have been a destination wedding regardless because his family is from upstate New York, which is about 6 hours away. My family is from down by New York City. And then he had family members in Chicago and California, and I had family members all across the United States. So we decided to have it where we met. So this is my personal recommendation. Price out everything, see your options, but have it be somewhere that's special to you guys, whether that be a park or a nice venue. We met in Saratoga Springs, New York. Now, for context, upstate New York tends to be cheaper than New York City. And I knew that. And I said, if I want to get married close to where I live, it's going to easily cost me double than me driving 2 hours north. So I made the decision to say, everybody, we're driving 2 hours north. It's a destination, not a far destination, if you're willing to make the drive. And that eliminated a lot of family members who weren't willing to make the trip. But like I said, I have family members all across the country. There was no location that wouldn't have been a destination for them anyway, quite frankly.
No, it's very true. And just thinking
Yeah.
about the cost is such an important part. Speaking of the budget for a wedding, this comes before you start, not after you total up everything. You're like, can we make this work? So you and your partner, you sit down, you're like, how much can we afford and how much do we want to spend for this wedding? Those are two very different numbers. Affording versus wanting to spend can be very different numbers depending on your income. And sometimes one is higher than the other and you have to make compromises. But you should have a number in mind before you start. And some scary stats out there, only 25% of people pay for their wedding in full. The other 75% are going into debt on their wedding in some way. So 25%, we were looking at the stat yesterday and prepping for this conversation, 25% of people are spending between $0 and $10,000. So they're spending it on credit. So either on a credit card or getting a loan out for this. And then there's another 50% that are spending more than $10,000 or borrowing more than $10,000 for their wedding. So what did you all do? Did you have a budget in mind before you started?
Yes. So I had looked at, similar to you, the knot.com, and the 2021 figure was around $48,000, roughly, a little over that. And I'd said, okay, well, realistically, with my current state of savings and your current state of savings, excluding everything else, I'm okay with allocating about 10% of my savings to this wedding. He was okay with the same. And then we also had parents who came in, diving into your parents' comments, who were like, we're so excited. How can we help? And that's a great thing, right? Everybody's like, oh, that's so positive. Here's my biggest piece of advice. If you have a parent who's kind enough who wants to help you, say, oh, thank you so much. We could use this towards our photography and videography budget. Or thank you so much. We could use this towards our flower. This is important for a couple of reasons. One, they walk into your wedding saying, hey, I made this possible. I contributed the flowers. I contributed to the photography and videography. Number two is because as much as parents are excited and they want to help you, they also are like, it would be really cool if your wedding had X, Y, Z. And guess what? You and your partner didn't sit down and say, we want to include X, Y, Z in our wedding budget. And that's how your wedding budget starts to multiply. And you're like, oh, thanks so much for helping me. I didn't really think about having these things in my wedding, but sure, you're helping me, I'll include it. And you become a yes woman or a yes man. So my
So
biggest piece of advice is
before you go in
upfront.
there, 42% of the bride's parents contribute to the wedding. 15% of the groom's parents do. And then usually the couple picks up about 45% of the overall cost of the wedding. So there's like a heavy input of parental involvement in weddings to start with. And yes, I love what you said. So what does this mean when it comes to taking help from parents?
Yeah, and it's different for everyone. I mean, everybody has a different culture too. Like, for example, I have Italian heritage. So by nature, there's certain Italian things at weddings that are outrageous. And I'm American, I was born in America, but my Italian relatives are like, you have to have, Italians want more of everything. It's just how their culture is. And I had to sit down and say, that's great. I really don't need to add that. Like, we don't need to add it. It's going to add so much cost to our wedding because I knew at the end of the day, my husband and I still were paying for a lot of it. And while it was great, we had help from parents, I allocated it to specific things. Like, for example, both of our parents were kind enough to help us, and I said, hey, that's great. This will go towards the pastries at our event, and I allocated it to certain things at the event. So when people walked in, I could say, hey, my mom or my dad helped contribute to this. Ryan's parents helped contribute to this. And it was kind of nice because we had like, everybody was super excited. I'm the oldest. But also key point, when you are the oldest and you're the first in your family to get married, everybody wants to invite everybody because you're the oldest. I'm the oldest granddaughter on my mom's side. Everybody wants to come because you're the first grandchild to get married. And you have to kind of say, hey, we've only allocated for this many people. And don't let it get crazy. I mean, I had some really crazy requests and I had to say no. Um, and it was hard. I even had a request to invite extended family members that aren't even my blood relatives. Um, and I just kind of had, and I grew up with them. I had to politely say no. It was my aunt's family, so it's her family that I'm not blood related to. But you have to keep in mind, I have about 8 different uncles and aunts. So I was like, I can't start inviting everybody's extended family. I have to put the line down somewhere. Um, but yeah, that's my biggest piece of advice there. And I definitely ended up spending more than I budgeted for, in part because I didn't seek the advice of professionals. And I started doing that along the way. And my biggest regret is not doing that up front. Because this is what's going to happen. You're going to start to get quotes along the way for wherever you decide to get married. And I got quotes from everybody because I'm super type A. And you see the range of options. And you start to sit down and you're like, wow, I was really unrealistic about my flower budget. I was, because you see these extreme flower setups on Instagram and Pinterest, and you're like, oh, that's so beautiful. How much does it cost? That costs a fortune. And I had to sit down and get really realistic and say, hey, I'm not Tiffany Trump. I can't have rows of flowers down the aisle and a huge arch. I'm a normal person. And most of us are normal people. And I had to sit down with my fiance and say, okay, how much are we okay allocating to this? And I got a real reality check from a lot of the floral vendors because they were like, well, you want all these things. This is how much it costs. And I got from the lowest price to the highest price. And I found a florist who was willing to work with my budget. But that also meant I didn't get everything I necessarily wanted. And I had to be okay with that.
Yeah, it's flowers. I think were one of the biggest hidden costs for us too, in terms of like what was totally unexpected. And that's the problem with social media as well, is that we see these glorious, beautiful weddings, particularly when celebrities are publishing what they're doing. And you're like, oh, I would love the same thing for myself. And you think like, oh, flowers, they're organic, they're grown in a garden, like they should be really cheap, but they're not. They're really expensive. And you can find different ways to do flowers. So like we found someone who privately did flower arranging and they bought all their flowers from like a Safeway. So it was a budget way to do it and still have a pretty nice looking wedding. But yeah, you had to really be strategic about where the flowers went, how many went into each spot. The bouquet that the bride may carry can be like a very expensive piece or can be a cheaper piece depending on the types of flowers that are in there. So you can think about, well, how do I make something pretty with a cheaper type of flower and then make it go with the rest of the wedding and so on. So definitely seek advice. And I like that you said that because I was going to ask you about a wedding planner. On the budget side of things, go to places like The Knot or Google and find a wedding planner guide. So like just a PDF that you can use to help you kind of figure out like, what are all the things that I have to think of when it comes to planning my budget for a wedding. So you can make a budget, that's great, but if you forgot half the things, then your budget's going to go out the window very fast. So make sure you've got a great list of all the things that you need to think about going into your wedding, and you can cross off stuff that doesn't apply to you, but at least you have something to start with. And then if you want to go up a level again, you might look at hiring a wedding planner or an event planner. Did you guys use an event planner?
Yes, but on the cheaper end of things. So there's a range of services you can get with a wedding planner. You can have the full service where they do everything, and that's extraordinarily expensive. Or you can have a day of wedding planner, or like they connect with you the month before to see all your vendors, and then the day of they help you with everything. So you don't have to direct everybody the day of. And I think this is something a lot of couples don't realize. You as the bride and groom are the host for all your guests, and you're going to be the one saying, okay, everybody go over here, everybody go over here. It is extraordinarily helpful to have somebody the day of help you with that, and you can get one for relatively cheap. I paid $2,000 for my day of wedding planner, but her full service was extreme, and they try to push the full service when you first connect with them. Everybody is different. I am very cost sensitive, and I was already spending a ton. So I was like, you know what? I would like your help the day of, because I'm pretty type A. I can hire people and I can see what works for me. She was very, very helpful with a couple of things that I wish I knew earlier and asked her earlier. Number one was I did a sparkler send off that you probably saw in the great picture Rob had shared with you all. And my venue let me do that at no extra charge. I had contacted them and said, is it okay if we do this? Do you have an extra charge? I was lucky they didn't charge us more for that. They said you just need to supply the sparklers. Now, sparklers aren't a ton of money, but I thought, oh, have a sparkler for every guest at the wedding. Like, that's just the polite thing to do. In your picture, they don't see everybody at your wedding. They probably see 20 to 30 people. And we had a big wedding party, so my wedding planner was like, oh, we only need to use 25 sparklers. Like, just get your wedding party. And we won't tell anybody else, because drunk people with sparklers really isn't a good idea. Number one, people drink at weddings. You don't want hundreds of people with sparklers where they can hurt themselves. And looking back on it, I'm like, well, I could have saved myself easily like $80 there if I listened to her advice up front and asked her about that before I got to the day of, which even if you hire them for a day of service, you can still email them with questions. They're there to help you. And that came at no extra charge. So that was an area where I wish I had a professional planner or photographer let me know, hey, you're only going to see this many people in the picture. And now I have all these extra sparklers that I'll probably just give to a relative or two relatives at this point, because I think I bought 150 sparklers. And I was like, why did I buy this many? And they're sitting in my bedroom at home, because what else are you going to do with them? And it's a total waste. You can't resell sparklers.
You've got
So
4th of
that,
July sorted for the rest of your life. You're all good.
yeah, like I'll have it for like, I guess my future kids. But it's something where like, that's where a planner comes in really handy. Another key thing that I learned during my wedding is if you want to do a bouquet toss, some people really grab that bouquet and really want to get married, okay? Don't use your bridal bouquet. You probably spent a fortune, or you put together and DIY'd your flowers and it took a lot of effort and energy and you like them for that day. Use one of your bridesmaids' flowers or another flower that you have around, because I can tell you when I threw my flower toss and I had one of my relatives catch it, she really went for that bouquet, and half the flowers fell off of it. So I was very happy I had a planner step in and tell me, hey, put your bouquet down, use one of your bridesmaids. Like, they'll be okay with it at the end of the day. Because some people also preserve their flowers in like picture frames if you're somebody who really likes that. So keep that in mind.
Oh, that was one thing that we didn't do that we wish you'd done more of, is like preserve some of the memories from the day we just didn't know. We had a day of organizer as well, so we didn't have a wedding planner. And like you said, really helpful for moving the pieces around during the day, because you don't really want to ask a groomsman or a bridesmaid to do that either, and you don't want to do it yourself. So it's just really nice to have this person who's not in the wedding marshal everyone around and kind of be bossy. Like you need someone to be bossy, direct, like get to your spot now. The bride and groom are about to walk down, put down what you're doing, get in your seat, and without annoying anybody or making anyone feel miffed. And no one's going to question them. So definitely consider it, or see if the venue provides somebody like that. And if they do, take advantage of it. All right. Going down into the costs of the categories. Now you can find a list of all the different costs and what they average, especially if you go to the Knot. I did have a site. I don't want to share because we're tight on time, but everything has a cost. And then what I want to ask you about is tipping culture when it comes to weddings, because this, my goodness, this killed our budget, was realizing how much you have to tip as well. So Nicolette, who do you tip and what is, I don't even want to say, it's like we're creating a myth now. Like how much do you tip somebody?
It really ranges depending on your vendor. And I am lucky my brother is a wedding photographer. So I went to him and I was like, hey, what's appropriate? Do people expect a tip? Because this is something that can come into the ninth inning of wedding planning. You're a month away from getting married and you're like, wait, I have to tip everybody, right? You got to think about this beforehand. And it ranges. So I had my brother help me. Photographers, full context, my brother has worked tons of weddings. He never expects a tip. He told me, he's like, it's an extra thing and it's a nice way to say thank you. And some people wait to tip photographers and videographers till they get their photos or video. He told me if you want to tip anywhere from $100 to $200 on the photographers and videographers working, that's a smart thing to do. You also want to read contracts, because some of the contracts that you sign, they have the tipping included, and service fees included, and you want to question them and say, excuse me, what is a service fee? Is this service fee accounting for a tip? Is it not accounting for a tip? Because some do and some do not. I had that with my florist. There was a pretty large service fee, and I had reached out to her and I was like, hi, I'm arranging tips. Is this service fee in my quote accounting for your tip? And it turns out it was. So I saved myself from tipping her there. Then I would have double tipped her. And sometimes when you double tip people, they're not going to say, oh, take the money back. They're just going to take it and think you're being nice. So really read the fine print. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I tipped everybody. So a lot of times when you hire a photographer or a videographer, they'll have an assistant, or you can choose to have an assistant. What I did there was I tipped the main photographer $100, the assistant $50. And then I put it all down in an Excel to kind of see how much I was spending on the total tips, because you also don't realize if you're at a venue where you have bartenders and servers, you also have to tip those people. And sometimes you might have a bathroom attendant, or a lot of inclusive venues. Like I had a bridal assistant, and she always made sure I was okay and getting things done and moving to the right places. So I tended to tip her a bit more than the other servers, because her job was a little bit more intensive. She was making sure I always had water or a drink handy and I was doing okay. But there's a range of options online, and I have some resource links I'm going to send after. I can even add to it in an email for students, Rob, basically what I ended up tipping people. But there's a range. I would say I was kind of towards the middle or lower range of that. But you do have to, especially for girls, right? Like, or even guys, if you're getting hair and makeup done, right? Hair and makeup costs a lot of money, and those people work really, really hard. You want to tip them and be polite. They're doing a lot for you that day. So I probably tipped my hair and makeup stylist the most.
Yeah, it's really anybody who is providing a service during your wedding is probably on the list for tips. So your videographer, photographer, any bar staff, any wait staff, your wedding planner, your event organizer, if they're different people, hair, makeup, gosh, there's so many things. And you want to think, oh, your DJ, your band, those are all big expenses as well. Your MC, if that's someone different, again, all are in line potentially for tips. So, and tip for giving tips, don't be the person to do it. Give cash envelopes to your best man, bridesmaid, groomsman, someone like that, parent, and just say, hey, these are the people who need to get them, have them in separate envelopes, cash ready to go, and just tell them, please disperse these at the end of the evening so you don't have to worry about it. Your job, once you're there, is to enjoy your day and not be worried about all the different things that come with running it. So if you've done your job right, you get to kind of just enjoy the event and not stress about it. You've got all the pieces taken care of before you start. All right, so I have two final questions for you before we go into a quick Q&A. First one is a prenuptial. So a prenuptial is a legally binding agreement that you and your partner both sign before you get married. And does it just talk about your assets and how they're divided, or is there anything else that goes into a prenuptial?
Oh, there's a ton that can go into a prenuptial. You can even you can specify a lot in that, how complex you want it. The more complex you get, the more it costs. Now I am somebody, we didn't have a prenup, but if it's something that's really important to you and you have a lot of detailed things, it could cost up to $10,000 to get a prenup. I was looking it up online. It ranges from like 1,000 to 10,000, depending on how complex you want to get with it. Yeah, so unfortunately, I can't speak to it in detail because I didn't go through the prenup process, but it is really important. And I think there's a lot of myths around prenups too. Like, especially if you're somebody that owns a business, you want to protect that business. And there's
Yes.
nothing wrong with that. At the end of the day, there's a lot of uncertainty. You can love your partner, think the world of them, never think you're going to get divorced. Things happen. Um, so there's certain things, like if you're somebody that's a freelancer and has a business and you want to protect that entity, you might want to get a prenup and specify that. There's just little things like that.
Or someone like you and I who have books where there's a royalty
Yeah.
coming from it. Like if you get married and you get divorced, your partner technically is entitled to half of those royalties for the rest of time. If you have one spouse who is very high income, high net worth beforehand, sometimes you want to consider like, okay, I need to preserve that wealth in the event that something doesn't go right. Because I would imagine we're talking 40, 50% of marriage ending in divorce. I don't think there's a very significant percentage that go into it thinking, yeah, I'm probably gonna be divorced in 5 years. Like, so we all go into this with the best of intentions. And a prenuptial, I heard this phrased one way, which I thought was really good. It's you have one whether you know it or not. So you can either agree something beforehand with your partner when things are good and rosy and you're both very like, yeah, this is what we believe in one another. We're very supportive of one another. Or you can have the court ordered one afterwards and you're leaving it up to a judge to decide how things are getting split. Now there is that third route where you both agree after the fact, like here's how assets will be divided. But just thinking about how you could protect your assets in particular, especially small businesses, royalty assets, things like that, just an important idea. And it's not something that everyone has to do. You will get a lot of pushback from our culture about it because it does kind of feel like, oh, you're saying it's doomed to fail. And it's not what you're saying. You're just saying that this is another part of the smart side of things when it comes to entering a binding agreement like this. You would sign something like this with any business entity that goes into an agreement with one another, any partners that you would have financially, like your personal spouse isn't really that different. But I know that it can be a sensitive topic. All right, I have a couple of questions up here for you. Do you have a number? How much did you pay for your wedding?
Yes, I spent $85,000 on my wedding.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, I'm being fully transparent, no judgment, guys. I did not go in thinking it was going to cost me $85,000, but then as I started learning, I was like, okay, this is dipping into my savings a bit more. And I had to have we had the discussion, like, this is going to be, we got married in 2022 during a wedding boom, during peak inflation. And I looked at the 2021 stats for New York State and I said, oh, we should spend around 50,000. And then I had looked up, and I'll send it to you all. There's a really good free wedding budget planner in Excel that somebody in the wedding industry developed on their website, and it's a free download. I downloaded it, and the list of things on this wedding budget, like the little things that you're not accounting for, like a lot of people do gifts for their significant others during the wedding. And there's a lot of little things that come up, like the menus, the invites, paper goods like that, that I have and I'll send to you guys. But basically, yeah, I spent a lot more in part because of the little things. Secondly was the flowers. This is something I wanted to touch on earlier, but I'll touch on now. The bigger your wedding party, the more expensive your flower budget has to be. I had 8 bridesmaids. My husband had 8 groomsmen. We had a lot of family members. So I didn't think about that. I went into my wedding quote thinking I would spend $6,000 on flowers. And she's like, oh, I can meet you there. And then that quickly grew into 10,000 based on the table setting I wanted, the style of the event I wanted, and the multiple of people I had at my wedding party, which is a personal decision. You want to have your family and friends, but it also ends up costing a little bit more the more people you add.
It's a very personal question, and I'll start with saying it myself first. My wife and I think we spent somewhere around 13,000 in our wedding. Um, would you do it again the same in hindsight? Like, obviously, it's great to be married and all that sort of thing, but if we think of it as this is a one-time party, would you spend that same amount on it? Would you do it differently? Would you save money in different ways? Like, what would you do differently next time?
I
Not
think
next time, if
so.
you did it again.
Biggest party of my life, right? And the reality is it flies by in the blink of an eye because it's one day of your life and there's a lot of days of your life. This is going to sound crazy. I would not do anything differently. Maybe the only thing I would do differently is having a longer engagement. So a lot of people now will have 2-year engagements. I was fortunate in the sense that I never went into credit card debt. I had a lot of savings before this. I kind of knew what I was allocating and I was comfortable with. And when that increased, it wasn't as much of a shock to me because I'm like, okay, we're dealing with this crazy market environment. This is the reality of what we're dealing with. And we were both in a comfortable position. Now, if I was somebody that didn't have a lot of savings and didn't have a lot of money allocated, because that's the reality for most people, I'm just going to be honest, most people don't have that type of money to spend on an event. I would definitely be like, I'll never do that again. But I was in a position where I was able to do it, and I'm very fortunate. So yeah, looking back on it, I had a great time. I just wish it never ended because it is only one day, guys. Like there's a lot of other parts of your life.
And that's the key thing, everyone. If you have the money and if you have saved for it, you budgeted for it, you can of course have anything you want in your life as long as you find a way to pay for it that is not beyond your means. So that can be you value something like a wedding, you value something like a house, vacations, cars, whatever it is. If you plan for it, you budget for it, you can of course include that in your budget. The cheapest wedding you can probably have is a courthouse wedding. So the very minimum you need is a marriage license. So you go to your local courthouse and you get a certificate basically saying that you are going to be married. And then you need an officiant to oversee the actual like marriage part of it, which is probably another $50 to $100. So you can probably get married at minimum for $100 to $200. You've heard of people like eloping to Vegas, same kind of idea. Like they just basically have a factory line of people getting married. So a very cheap way to do it. You mentioned an online site where you can get married in an hour. So there are definitely ways to do it super cheap, all the way up to the $1 million plus weddings that you see our celebrities having. And it's based on your income, it's based on your savings. Like you can have a high income, have no savings, and an expensive wedding is still a bad idea. You can have a low income and a ton of savings, and you can make a more extravagant thing happen. Saving for a wedding, usually I would say most people start when they get engaged. But if you're looking at the stats, you're like, okay, 90+% of people will get married at some point in their lives, then it kind of makes sense to be like, okay, well, maybe I should just start saving. If I want something more extravagant, my dream wedding is a very expensive looking thing. Start putting some money aside now. Set up a little savings account, a little sinking fund for your future wedding. And if you never get married, great. You've got this big pot of money you can go spend on something really fun for yourself. And if you do get married, you can come into it being like, okay, I've saved some stuff. We can do some of these more fun things that I've always dreamed of doing. So it's all about budgeting and allocating and meeting your goals and your needs. All right. A couple of more questions. How long was your engagement? How long did it take you to plan this?
It took me a year and a month, and I almost went into 2 years. I almost went into 2 years because I am very cost sensitive, and I was like, you know what, maybe it's smart to do 2 years. But then I ended up doing a year and a month because I found the venue I liked, and it was a lot cheaper than the venues in New York City. And I was like, you know what, I really like it here. They do a lot that I don't have to worry about. Let me go with this. So that had over half of it done because it was an inclusive venue that they had a planner beside my day of planner. They were taking care of food. They were taking care of a lot of the things. I didn't have to do everything from scratch, which is something some brides do.
Yeah, and your venue, everyone, is probably going to be one of the things that dictates the timeline as well. A lot of venues, you want to look at booking them a year to 9 months plus in advance. The time of year that you get married can be a big impact on the cost as well. So like April through June is usually wedding season in like Maryland, because that's when the temperature is nicest. And then it kind of picks up again in September when the summer heat's gone and it's not quite winter yet. Winter, much cheaper time to get married. Heat of summer, cheaper time as well, just because it's less popular. People don't want to get married during those times. So if you're looking to save money, potentially you could look at some of these off-peak times as a way of getting married at a nicer venue at a cheaper rate. What are some other tips for saving on weddings? Any like big kind of overarching ones?
Yeah, I guess the biggest one is DIYing things. And I think a lot of people think DIYing like, oh, I go buy a template off Etsy and I'll print it all out, which some people do. That's definitely a cost sensitive option. I have found a creative way so you can make your own templates, and I'm going to share with you free templates of mine that you guys can use if you want. I'm giving you free access to stuff I've done because honestly, it's already done. And if you want to edit it and print it out for yourself, go right ahead, knock yourself out. So I already had a Canva from my book business. And I went on the Canva and I did DIY'd all my programs, my menus, all my paper goods that were related to my wedding. I DIY'd. Now this helped me out a bunch because when you look at the cost of how much your invites can cost and things like that, I mean, it could get in the hundreds of dollars if you're inviting a ton of people. I mean, stamps alone, right? You have to think about the cost of the stamp and the cost of the envelope and the invite itself. So if you're DIYing that, you're saving a ton of money up front. I also highly recommend, like, even though I spent a lot on my wedding, right? I went to Dollar Tree and DIY'd a bunch of things, and nobody would know I went to Dollar Tree. They walked into this nice venue, and some of the stuff there was from Dollar Tree, and it was a beautiful wedding. So a lot of the venues will tell you you need to have a bathroom kit in each bathroom. Don't go to a big store where you're going to end up spending a ton of money. Like, don't go to the Container Store, don't go to Target, don't go to CVS. Go to the Dollar Tree. You can get those containers for $1. And the stuff that you can put in the containers, like the soap and things that you would expect in a bathroom kit, you can get from the Dollar Tree. So I did that. That's a big tip. I think the other biggest tip, which is one we mentioned earlier, was lab grown diamonds. I don't think there's anything wrong with a lab grown diamond if you're somebody who wants a diamond but doesn't want to spend a fortune or have your significant other spend a fortune. So yeah, those would be my biggest pieces of advice, and look at multiple quotes. So this is something I did, but I definitely recommend it. Doing it as early as possible is look at quotes in the area that you're thinking of getting married and compare and say, is this realistic for me? Because I have relatives who are getting married in New York City and they're like, how much did you spend on this? And I'm like, oh, I spent this. They're like, I can't find anybody for that. Everybody in New York City is double. So your location really does matter at the end of the day. And you think hard about that, you know. Think about your current state of savings for this event and say, is this location even feasible? Because some states are more expensive than other states. And there's a ton of people online who get married overseas. And when you break down the number, it actually ends up being a lot cheaper. And it's a beautiful wedding in a foreign country. There's nothing wrong with that.
No, those are all great tips. I'll add some in as well. Look for used items on places like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist. You can actually basically buy someone else's wedding. Like, you finish your wedding, you've got all of this decor that you use to kind of assemble this theme for your wedding, and just sell it as a lump. Like, hey, here's how you do a mid-century modern wedding, like in this particular venue. And you can just go and buy someone else's wedding decor really cheap because they have no use for it. I mean, most wedding decor is not usable again ever. It's like all this gold, silver, like sparkly stuff that like you're never going to use again. So if someone else can pick it up and use it and just basically recreate the same theme wedding, why not? That could be a way of doing it for cheap. DIYing stuff, absolutely. So we DIY'd some of our like flowers. We DIY'd. So in terms of like, we made our own bouquets. We actually made some like paper flower stuff for outside so that it wouldn't wilt in the summer heat. Assemble like our own centerpieces a little bit. So like, there's lots of things that you can do on your own. And I love that you mentioned Canva, like canva.com. If you have not heard of canva.com, it is the best resource ever out there for creating content for social media, content for your business, anything like this for a wedding. Like, you can make stuff look beautiful and professional for like your total amateur. Like the templates are amazing, and then you can create whatever you want. It's, I think, $120 a year for a pro license. Like it might be worth it to invest in that for cutting costs elsewhere in your wedding. And it's just, I love having it. It's my first tool that I would buy for my business if you have a small business. All right, finally, what is your number one tip for teens to build wealth? So we're just about to wrap up, and I'm really curious what your number one tip for teens is.
My number one tip for teens is saving and investing early. And I say saving and investing early importantly because the power of investing is exponential. And I know what you said, number one tip, but it's also passive streams of income. So like in order for you to get to that and proactively save, like you need to develop passive streams of income, and there's ways to do that without breaking the bank per se. Like I mentioned the Canva templates, you can make those download the Canva templates accessible and then sell them on Etsy. And people are selling those templates on Etsy for like $7 a pop to download. And that doesn't require any shipping because people are virtually downloading the template. You can get creative and make templates and then have people do it there, make your own Etsy shop. So there's creative ways where you can get out there and be entrepreneurial about that. But I think investing is the biggest thing because you have people who save and then they're not growing their wealth as much as somebody who's investing. I have a really good blog post on it called Savings is Overrated. And it basically breaks down the difference between a little girl saving over time versus investing over time. And I really stress that because there's a lot of myths around investing, but that's just me.
Okay, those are two wonderful tips. And if you're interested in more information about passive income, check out the last live stream we did with Cody Berman. So if you're watching the replay of this, you should see it in the YouTube feed as an option that you could watch. So Cody talked all about using digital products. And I think he actually does sell wedding templates with his business partner. And then if you're interested in investing, we have a future speaker coming up at the end of December. Jeremy Schneider from Personal Finance Club is going to be coming in to talk about investing. And if you are not following him, he is one of the top people I recommend to follow when it comes to learning to invest. So that's at Personal Finance Club. But speaking of following people, Nicolette, how can people find out more about you? You mentioned a blog, and I also want you to talk about social media because let's face it, we do a lot of social media here.
Yeah, I'm on at stock_explore on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook, so you can find me there. I do videos. I try to do them daily. I've been a little bit slower with that as of recently. And then I also do comics, so I'm on Substack. If you want to get a free comic, I do free comics, and I do a blog on there. I did a bunch of comics last year. I also have my book Stock Explorer on Amazon. So I am all over the place. Feel free to connect with me on any of those channels, and I'm happy to. I also have those links. I don't know how to get them on here without.
I think what I will do is I will put them in the YouTube description with the replay. So anyone who's watching live, you'll be able to find this when you get the replay link sent to you, and I'll include those links there. And if you're watching the replay, check in the YouTube description. You'll find the links there. All right, Nicolette, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And I know we spent longer talking about weddings than I thought we could, but it's a really cool conversation and it's a really good budgeting conversation. So it's a great way to just think about how are you going to take a lifetime of budgeting and put it into a smaller event. So practice planning events is a great way to practice budgeting. All right. Any final words of wisdom or anything you want to say before we hang up?
No, I think that really covers it. And I'm happy to answer any other additional questions if people wanted to connect afterwards. I know wedding planning can be overwhelming and there's a lot of myths. So yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. Talk to you all soon. Thank you for joining us if you're joining us live. And thank you if you're watching the replay. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Leave any questions you have for Nicolette or I in the comments, or reach out to either of us via social media. Bye for now.